Sunday, February 23, 2026. The mountains above Tapalpa, Jalisco, Mexico. Before sunrise, Mexican Army Special Forces and National Guard units moved quietly through the hills, armed with intelligence that had taken years to build. Their target, the most powerful drug lord in the world. A man the United States had placed a $15 million bounty on. A man so elusive, only a handful of photos of him existed. A man who had turned a small cartel into a criminal empire spanning 40 countries. His name was Nemesio Ruben Oscar Cervantes. The world knew him as El Mencho.
In Mexico, there's utter chaos and tension. Buses are burning on highways, flights have been cancelled, streets are empty, and people are afraid to leave their homes. It all began after one man was killed. His name was Nemesio Oscar Cervantes. Most people know him as El Mencho. He was one of Mexico's most powerful drug lords. Yesterday, he was killed by Mexican security forces, and what followed was massive violence. Gunmen linked to El Mencho's cartel blocked roads, torched vehicles, and attacked several cities across the country.
He was a student of the game. One former DEA analyst later described him. He watched how El Chapo built his empire, the logistics, the corruption, the violence, and he filed all of it away for when it was his time. That time came sooner than anyone expected. In 2009, everything changed. The Mexican government arrested Oscar Nava Valencia, the leader of the Manhunt cartel. His capture sent shockwaves through the organization, fracturing it into competing factions. It was exactly the kind of power vacuum that ambitious men like Nemesio Oscar Cervantes had been waiting for. From the smoking ruins of the Manhunt cartel, a new organization would emerge. And this time, Nemesio would be at the top. 2009. Mexico was already bleeding. The drug war was consuming entire cities. Thousands were dying. And into that chaos, El Mencho built something the world had never seen before. Around 2009 to 2011, accounts vary slightly, Nemesio Oscar Cervantes co-founded the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Known in Spanish as the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generation, or CJNG. He built it alongside Eric Valencia Salazar, known as L85, and crucially with the support of his brother-in-law, Abigail Gonzalez Valencia, the head of Los Zetas. A powerful family-based organization from Michoacan that would serve as CJNG's financial and logistical backbone. The name said it all, New Generation. El Mencho wasn't building an old-fashioned cartel. He was building a corporation, a military, an empire. From the beginning, CJNG operated differently from other cartels. While organizations like the Sinaloa cartel were built on decades of tradition and family ties, El Mencho designed CJNG as a franchise model. Regional cells could operate under the CJNG banner, pledging allegiance to El Mencho and paying tribute, while maintaining local control. It was a structure that allowed for explosive growth without requiring El Mencho to micromanage every operation, and grow it did. Within just a few years, CJNG had established a presence across western Mexico, Jalisco, Colima, Veracruz, Nayarit, Michoacan. They pushed into trafficking corridors that connected cocaine supplies from Colombia with the insatiable American market for drugs. They moved cocaine, heroin, and increasingly methamphetamine, which CJNG manufactured domestically, reducing their dependence on Colombian suppliers. But what truly set CJNG apart, and what made El Mencho genuinely terrifying, was his willingness to attack the state itself. Most cartels tried to avoid direct confrontation with the Mexican military. El Mencho embraced it. In 2015, CJNG carried out one of the most audacious attacks in Mexican cartel history. An ambush on a Mexican federal police convoy in Jalisco that left 15 officers dead and 5 wounded. They didn't just fight back, they hunted law enforcement. That same year, CJNG fighters shot down a Mexican military helicopter with a rocket launcher. A military helicopter. This wasn't a cartel anymore. This was a paramilitary force. The FBI was paying close attention. They would later designate CJNG as one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world, not just in Mexico, in the world. He was the most powerful drug lord in Mexico, possibly in the world, and almost nobody had seen his face. By the mid-2010s, El Mencho had become a ghost. While cartel leaders like El Chapo cultivated a kind of outlaw celebrity, giving interviews, appearing in public, even meeting with actors and journalists, El Mencho went the opposite direction. He disappeared, deliberately, methodically, completely. All known photographs of him dated back decades. He never appeared in videos, he never made public statements. He communicated through layers of intermediaries. His operatives didn't know where he slept on any given night. His location was compartmentalized. Only a handful of his most trusted inner circle ever knew where El Mencho actually was at any given moment. This obsessive secrecy was not paranoia. It was strategy. El Mencho had watched what happened to cartel leaders who became too visible. El Chapo had been caught twice, partly because his own fame made him a target. El Mencho would not make that mistake. His health was reportedly a constant concern. Sources indicated El Mencho suffered from severe kidney disease, requiring dialysis, which may have further restricted his movements and made it even harder for authorities to track him through. Patterns of behavior. A man who needs medical treatment has a vulnerability. El Mencho managed that vulnerability with the same ruthlessness he managed everything else. He moved constantly. He used couriers for communication. He rotated safe houses. He trusted virtually no one. The United States raised the bounty on his head multiple times, eventually reaching $15 million by December 2024, and still, for years, no one collected. In an era of cell phone surveillance, satellite tracking, and signals intelligence, El Mencho remained invisible. It was, by any measure, a remarkable achievement. El Chapo smuggled drugs. El Mencho industrialized them. By the late 2010s, CJNG under El Mencho had become what the FBI called Mexico's most powerful trafficking organization, responsible, by DEA estimates, for at least 1/3 of all drugs entering the United States by air and sea. But it was the fentanyl trade that transformed El Mencho from a powerful criminal into something closer to a public health catastrophe. Fentanyl, the synthetic opioid up to 100 times more potent than morphine, had begun flooding the American drug market in the 2010s. CJNG became one of its primary manufacturers and distributors. Unlike heroin, which required poppy cultivation, fentanyl could be synthesized in laboratories from chemical precursors, many of which CJNG sourced from China. El Mencho built production facilities across Mexico, turning Jalisco into a manufacturing hub for a drug that was killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. In 2022, El Mencho was charged in the United States with conspiracy to manufacture and distribute methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl for importation into the United States. American prosecutors described CJNG as having a direct role in fueling the opioid epidemic devastating communities across the country. But El Mencho was building more than a drug empire. CJNG under his leadership had expanded into virtually every form of serious crime: extortion, kidnapping, human trafficking, migrant smuggling, oil theft from Mexican state pipelines, mineral theft, arms trafficking, and money laundering on a massive scale. The U.S. Treasury Department documented the group's involvement in fuel theft and crude oil smuggling. His innovation with weapons was terrifying. CJNG was a pioneer in using drones armed with explosives, a tactic more associated with military conflicts in the Middle East than with criminal organizations. They installed landmines. They built armored vehicles, crude but effective machines welded together from trucks and steel plating that could withstand small arms fire. They deployed rocket launchers against government forces. In June 2020, CJNG carried out perhaps its most brazen attack, an assassination attempt against Mexico City's Secretary of Public Security, Omar Garcia Harfuch, in the heart of the capital. Using grenades and high-powered rifles, they ambushed his convoy in broad daylight on one of Mexico's most famous avenues. Garcia Harfuch survived barely with 3 bullet wounds, but the message was unmistakable. CJNG would attack anyone, anywhere. By 2019, a former DEA agent told CBS News that El Mencho was the #1 priority for DEA and, frankly, for federal law enforcement in the United States. The CJNG had contacts in over 40 countries, from Latin America to Australia, China, and Southeast Asia, according to the U.S. State Department. El Mencho had built not just a cartel. He had built a transnational criminal enterprise that rivaled, and in some ways surpassed, anything that had come before it. El Mencho trusted almost no one, but he trusted his family, and one by one the Americans took them. Like many cartel leaders, El Mencho kept his inner circle tightly bound by blood. His wife, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, sister of his key financial partner Abigail Gonzalez Valencia, was deeply embedded in CJNG operations. She was detained in Mexico on financial crime allegations, though later released. Her brother Abigail, the financial architect of the entire operation, was eventually extradited to the United States. His son, Ruben Oscar Gonzalez, known as El Menchito, was groomed to follow his father's path. El Menchito rose to become a powerful figure within CJNG in his own right. Reportedly involved in ordering killings and personally overseeing the early fentanyl smuggling operations into the United States. In March 2025, a U.S. federal court sentenced El Menchito to life in prison plus 30 years. Former U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland said at sentencing that El Menchito had used murder, kidnapping, and torture to build the cartel into a self-described empire. His daughter was also arrested and imprisoned. His brother-in-law Abigail was extradited and convicted. His longtime associate and CJNG co-founder, Eric L85 Valencia Salazar, was taken into U.S. custody in February 2025 as part of a massive operation that swept up 29 wanted cartel leaders. Another associate, Antonio Tony Montana Oscar Cervantes, was also arrested. A money launderer connected to the cartel, Christian El Guacho Gutierrez Ochoa, received an 11-year sentence in the U.S. in 2025. One by one, the pillars of El Mencho's organization were being dismantled. His son in prison for life, his co-founder in custody, his financial network being dismantled, his family incarcerated. El Mencho watched all of this happen from the shadows, and he kept hiding. But hiding came with a price. Every trusted lieutenant who was arrested was a potential intelligence source. Every arrest tightened the noose, and the Americans and Mexicans, working together more closely than ever, were getting closer. By 2025, El Mencho was the last man standing, and the whole world was looking for him. In December 2024, the United States State Department raised the bounty for El Mencho's arrest or conviction to $15 million, $1 of the highest rewards ever offered for a fugitive in history. The poster described him simply as a fugitive. He had been indicted multiple times in the United States since 2017. The message was clear: America wanted El Mencho. Then, in January 2025, Donald Trump returned to the White House and immediately made the cartels a centerpiece of his national security agenda. In February 2025, the Trump administration took an extraordinary step, officially designating CJNG and 7 other Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. It was the same designation applied to groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. The implications were significant. It opened the door for U.S. military involvement in targeting cartel operations. It allowed financial institutions to be held liable for any connections to CJNG. It put El Mencho in the same legal category as the world's most wanted terrorists. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum found herself under enormous pressure. Trump had imposed tariffs on Mexican goods and was threatening further economic pain unless Mexico delivered results on the cartel front. Mexico sent thousands of National Guard and Army troops to the U.S. border. It extradited dozens of cartel members to American custody. And it quietly began the most intensive intelligence operation in Mexican history to locate El Mencho. By early 2026, the operation was entering its final phase. Multiple senior CJNG figures had already been arrested or killed. The cartel's financial networks were under sustained attack. U.S. intelligence, signals intelligence, human intelligence, satellite surveillance was flowing to Mexican counterparts at unprecedented levels. The walls were closing in on El Mencho from every direction. He was sick. He was isolated. His family was imprisoned. His organization was under attack. And for the first time in years, his location was known. Mexican military intelligence had pinpointed a location in Tapalpa, a small, picturesque mountain town about 2 hours southwest of Guadalajara. El Mencho, despite all his precautions, had been tracked there. The operation was authorized. The teams were assembled. The clock was running out. Sunday, February 23, 2026. Before the sun rose over Tapalpa, Jalisco, history was made. In the early hours of Sunday, February 23, 2026, Mexican Army Special Forces and units of the National Guards, Immediate Reaction Special Force, converged on a location in Tapalpa, Jalisco. They moved with precision. The Mexican Air Force provided overhead support. American intelligence had provided what Mexico's Defense Secretariat later described as complementary information, the kind of intelligence that could only come from years of surveillance and penetration of CJNG's communications. The operation's stated goal was to capture El Margaret, but El Mencho's guards were not going to allow that without a fight. As Mexican forces moved in, CJNG operatives at the location opened fire. A fierce firefight erupted in the Jalisco mountains. 4 CJNG members were killed immediately in the exchange. 3 more, including El Mencho himself, were critically wounded. 3 Mexican soldiers were also injured in the battle. 2 CJNG members were captured alive, and the troops seized armored vehicles, rocket launchers, and other heavy weapons from the compound. Nemesio Ruben Oscara Cervantes, El Mencho, was gravely wounded during the raid. Mexican authorities loaded him onto a helicopter and began flying him to Mexico City, but he never arrived. He died during the transfer. Mexico's Ministry of Defense released an official statement confirming his death. The statement described the operation, the firefight, and the aftermath. It was clinical. Matter of fact, but the weight of what it meant was anything but. Mexico City, thousands of kilometers away, was stunned. Then slowly, the news began to spread. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau, was among the first American officials to respond publicly. He confirmed the cartel leader's death on X, formerly Twitter, calling El Mencho one of the bloodiest and most ruthless drug kingpins and declaring, "This is a great development for Mexico, the U.S., Latin America, and the world. The good guys are stronger than the bad guys." White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt confirmed that the United States had provided intelligence support to the Mexican government for the operation. "President Trump has been very clear," she said. "The United States will ensure narco-terrorists sending deadly drugs to our homeland are forced to face the wrath of justice they have long deserved." For Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, who had been under enormous pressure from the Trump administration, it was the ultimate proof of results. She applauded Mexican security forces and called for calm. Her defense secretary, General Ricardo Trevilla Trillo, described a very violent clash during the ground operation before El Mencho was taken. The most wanted drug lord in the world was dead. He was 59 years old. El Mencho was dead, but the cartel he built was very much alive. And it wanted the world to know. Within hours of El Mencho's death being confirmed, CJNG unleashed one of the most dramatic displays of cartel power in Mexican history. Across the country, cartel members set vehicles ablaze and used burning cars to block roads. The blockade spread across nearly a dozen, then 20 Mexican states. Smoke billowed into the skies above Guadalajara, Jalisco's capital, which was turned into a ghost town as civilians locked their doors and stayed home. It was simultaneously a show of grief, rage, and power. CJNG was telling Mexico and the world that the organization had survived, that the cartel was still there. That killing El Mencho had not killed the CJNG. The violence rippled outward in ways that affected ordinary people far beyond Mexico's drug war. Major airlines, including Southwest, canceled flights in and out of Puerto Vallarta, stranding hundreds of American tourists. The U.S. State Department issued urgent security alerts warning Americans in Jalisco, Tamaulipas, Michoacán, Guerrero, Nuevo León, Baja California, Sinaloa, Quintana Roo, and other states to shelter in place. The State Department's 24/7 crisis hotline was flooded with hundreds of calls from frightened U.S. citizens. Several Mexican states canceled school on Monday. Local and foreign governments issued warnings. International airlines suspended operations at multiple Mexican airports. The FIFA World Cup, scheduled to be partially hosted in Guadalajara, loomed in the background, adding to international concern about stability. By the time Mexican authorities declared most of the more than 250 cartel roadblocks cleared, a grim toll was emerging. 25 members of Mexico's National Guard, a prison guard, and a government official had been killed in the clashes. A woman was also dead. 30 cartel members were reported killed in the fighting across the country. The scenes shocked the world, but they did not shock Mexico's security analysts. They had warned of exactly this moment for years. El Mencho is gone, but the empire he built spans 40 countries, earns billions of dollars a year, and manufactures the drug that is killing more Americans than any war in U.S. history. What happens now? Analysts were quick to point out the uncomfortable truth. Killing a cartel's leader rarely kills the cartel. When the Mexican government arrested El Chapo in 2016, and he was subsequently extradited to the United States, the Sinaloa cartel survived. It fractured, yes. It went to war with itself. Thousands died in the power struggle, but it endured. The situation with CJNG may be even more complex. El Mencho had built his organization specifically to survive without him. The franchise model, with semi-autonomous regional cells operating under the CJNG brand, meant that no single arrest or killing could decapitate the entire organization. When the head falls, the body keeps moving, but El Mencho's death leaves a dangerous vacuum at the top. His son is serving life in prison. His brother is imprisoned in the United States. His co-founder is in custody. His daughter is arrested. His closest financial partner is extradited. There is no obvious, clear, universally accepted successor. We could now see different regional bosses in the cartel start disputing for power. Al Jazeera's John Homan reported from Mexico City. We saw this happen before. When El Chapo was arrested, it eventually sparked a civil war between the different Sinaloa factions. The rival Sinaloa cartel, already tearing itself apart in its own internal power struggle, was watching with great interest. The territories CJNG had carved out over 15 years of brutal expansion were now potentially up for grabs. The worst-case scenario for Mexico was a multi-cartel war over those territories. David Mora, a senior analyst for Mexico at the International Crisis Group, noted that under President Sheinbaum, the Mexican army had become way more confrontational, combative against criminal groups, a signal to the United States that Mexico was serious about results. El Mencho's killing was the ultimate proof, but there was a wider question, too, one that went beyond Mexico. El Mencho's CJNG had been the primary force driving fentanyl into the United States. The drug was manufactured in Mexican labs, often using precursors from China, and transported across the border in quantities large enough to be the leading cause of overdose deaths in America. With CJNG in chaos, would fentanyl production slow, or would it simply shift to other organizations, other hands, other routes? History suggested the second option. The drug trade is not a corporation that can be shut down by arresting its CEO. It is a market, and markets find new suppliers. Nemesio Ruben Oscar Cervantes was born in poverty in the mountains of Michoacán. He grew up in a world where the cartels were not just criminals, they were the only power that mattered. He became a cop, then a criminal, then a capo. And then something unprecedented. The most powerful, most elusive, most dangerous drug lord the modern world had ever seen. For nearly 2 decades, he built an organization that the FBI called one of the 5 most dangerous criminal groups on Earth. He manufactured and distributed the drugs that fueled an epidemic killing tens of thousands of people a year. He attacked soldiers, shot down helicopters, assassinated police chiefs, and ordered the deaths of countless rivals, informants, and anyone who stood in his way. He lived like a ghost and ran an empire. And on February 23, 2026, in the mountains above a small Jalisco town, in a firefight with Mexican Army Special Forces supported by American intelligence, the ghost finally became a corpse. He was 59 years old. He died without ever standing trial. He never answered for the lives destroyed by the drugs his cartel sold. He never answered for the people his killers murdered. He died as he had lived, a fugitive. The cartel he built still exists. The fentanyl still flows. The violence has not stopped. In some ways, his death may have made things worse. But tonight, in Mexico City, in Washington, D.C., and in the families of those lost to cartel violence and drug overdoses, there is at least this: the knowledge that no one, no matter how powerful, no matter how well hidden, no matter how feared, runs forever. And that is the story of El Mencho, the man who built Mexico's most powerful cartel, evaded capture for decades, and met his end in the mountains of Jalisco. If you made it this far, thank you, genuinely. This story took real research, real work, and real respect for the gravity of the lives involved on all sides of this tragedy. If you found this documentary valuable, please hit the like button. Subscribe to Crime Case Vault and share this video with someone who wants to understand how the drug war really works, not from the news, not from a movie, but from the facts. Drop a comment below. Do you think El Mencho's death will change anything? Will CJNG survive? Will the fentanyl crisis ease? I want to hear your take. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, truth is always stranger than fiction.
Two brothers, Zeta 40 and Zeta 42, the leaders of the Zetas cartel, now known as Cartel del Noreste, are now in U.S. custody after being extradited. Tonight, Ariami Virgen shares how the brothers were found in Mexico and why their extradition is a message to all foreign drug traffickers. According to Javier Peña, the DEA agent whose life is depicted in the Netflix series Narcos.
72 people, shot in the back of the head, one by one, piled up like garbage in a ranch outside San Fernando, Mexico. Men and women who had crossed half a continent trying to reach the American dream, murdered because they refused to become killers themselves. This was not a battle. This was not a war. This was the Los Zetas' way of doing business. But here is what makes this story unlike anything else you have ever heard. The men who ordered that massacre, the men who pulled those triggers, were not gangsters who grew up on street corners. They were not born criminals. They were soldiers, elite soldiers, trained by the United States Army at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, trained to fight drug cartels. And then, one by one, they became the cartel. To understand Los Zetas, you first need to understand who they were before they became monsters. 1994. Mexico is in crisis. The Zapatista uprising has just erupted in Chiapas. The government is terrified of insurgency spreading. In response, Mexico creates one of the most elite military units in its history, the Grupo Aeromoval de Fuerzas Especiales, the GAFE. Mexico's version of the Green Berets. The specific skills learned by the Zetas, one expert later told Al Jazeera, primed them for careers as contract killers and drug dealers. They were given the tools to destroy criminal organizations. Instead, they built one. Among the GAFE's brightest officers is a young lieutenant from Puebla, Arturo Guzman de Sena. Born January 13, 1976, in a poor rural village, Guzman de Sena had joined the military as a teenager to escape poverty. He was brilliant, aggressive, and deeply ambitious. His talent earned him a place in the GAFE. His ambition would betray everything he had been trained to stand for. By 1997, the Gulf Cartel is the dominant drug trafficking empire in northeast Mexico, controlling one of the most important cocaine corridors in the world. Its new boss, Ocio Cardenas Gillen, has just seized power through violence and betrayal. He is now fighting on two fronts, rival cartels attacking his territory and the Mexican army breathing down his neck. He needs protection, not bodyguards, not street thugs, warriors. He reaches out to Guzman de Sena. The conversation between them was later captured by an informant and released by federal agents. Cardenas Gillen said, "I want the best men." "The best," Guzman de Sena replied, "these are only in the army." That was all that needed to be said. Guzman de Sena begins recruiting, not from street corners or prisons, from military bases. He approaches GAFE comrades, men he has trained and fought alongside, and offers them something the Mexican government never could: money, real money. The government paid soldiers poverty wages. Cardenas Gillen was offering salaries 10, 20, 50 times higher. Over several months, Guzman de Sena convinces 34 GAFE operators to desert. They bring with them the Mexican Army's most sophisticated weaponry: assault rifles, machine guns, bazookas, grenades, surveillance equipment, military-grade communications gear. They bring maps, tactics, training. Discipline. Each member is given a code name starting with the letter Z, the radio code for high-ranking military commanders in Mexico. Guzman de Sena becomes Z1. His deputy, Heriberto Lazcano, becomes Z3. The group becomes known as Los Zetas, the ZS. Mexico had spent years and American money training the perfect counter-narcotics force, one former DEA official later said. And in 1997, that force switched sides. The Gulf Cartel had always had muscle. But with the Zetas, it had something no cartel had ever possessed before, a professional army. From the moment the GAFE deserters go to work for Cardenas Gillen, everything changes. The Gulf Cartel's rivals quickly realize they are not fighting ordinary criminals anymore. These men move with military precision. They conduct ambushes the way they were trained to, cutting off escape routes, overwhelming firepower, no survivors. They plant informants in police departments and military units. They intercept radio communications. They don't just kill their enemies, they destroy them. The Sinaloa Cartel, Mexico's dominant trafficking organization, tries to muscle into Nuevo Laredo, the Gulf Cartel's crown jewel. Nuevo Laredo sits directly on the U.S. border in Tamaulipas and is the single most important portal for smuggling cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine into the United States. Losing it would be catastrophic. The Zetas are sent to defend it. The result is a massacre. The Sinaloa gunmen are outclassed in every conceivable way. In 2005 and 2006, Los Zetas repel every incursion because the last several chiefs had been murdered or fled. He was a good man, a brave man, a father of three. He stood before cameras that morning and declared, "I am not beholden to anyone. My commitment is to the citizenry." Within 6 hours, he was dead. Zeta hitmen pumped more than 30 bullets into his body in broad daylight. His death sent a message to every law enforcement official, politician, and judge in northeastern Mexico. The Zetas own these streets. You work for them or you die. They didn't just recruit from the Mexican military either. As their numbers grew and the original GAFE operators were gradually killed or captured, the Zetas began hiring Guatemalan Cartels, the most feared special forces unit in Central America. Trained in brutal counterinsurgency warfare during Guatemala's civil war. They brought in corrupt federal, state, and local police, former U.S. Army soldiers, anyone who knew how to fight and kill professionally. By the time Z1, Arturo Guzman de Sena, was killed by Mexican Army Special Forces in a restaurant in Matamoros on November 21, 2002, Los Zetas had already transformed from a small bodyguard unit into a full military force. The man who built them was dead. The machine he built was just getting started. Guzman de Sena was the architect, one analyst described. But Lazcano, Z3, was the one who would turn the Zetas into something no one had ever seen before.
This is my reign! Let's go!
Heriberto Lazcano, Z3, also known as El Lazca, also known as El Verdugo the Executioner. The man who turned a band of military deserters into the most feared criminal organization on the planet. Lazcano takes command of Los Zetas after Guzman de Sena's death in 2002. And almost immediately after, the Gulf Cartel's leader Ocil Cardenas Gillen is arrested in March 2003. It is a crisis that would have destroyed any other criminal organization. Instead, for Los Zetas, it is an opportunity. Lazcano also builds what can only be described as a shadow state. The Zetas infiltrate state governments in Tamaulipas and Veracruz. They control police departments. They fund political campaigns. They run entire towns. In some areas of Tamaulipas, Los Zetas do not simply coexist with local government. They are the local government. Mayors receive their salaries from the cartel. Police chiefs report to Zeta commanders. Business owners pay weekly extortion fees or watch their businesses burn. Under Lazcano, the Zetas also pioneer the use of terror as a business strategy. Not just killing rivals, performing violence as spectacle, decapitations, bodies dissolved in acid, human beings burned alive, torture videos distributed to rivals and law enforcement as a warning. The cartel doesn't just want to win territorial disputes. It wants its enemies, and everyone watching, to be so paralyzed by fear that resistance becomes unthinkable. By 2010, early analysts indicate that Los Zetas are the largest organized crime group in Mexico in terms of geographical presence, controlling hundreds of municipalities across 11 states. They have spread into Guatemala, seizing trafficking corridors with military force. They have contacts in Panama, Honduras, El Salvador, Peru, Venezuela, the United States, and Europe. They are just known for being a different kind of human being, one Mexico-based researcher told Al Jazeera. The Zetas definitely have the reputation of being the most dangerous, the most vicious, the most renegade of the cartels. And then comes February 2010, the moment that changes everything. The moment the Zetas cut their last remaining tie to the Gulf Cartel and declare themselves independent. From this moment forward, they answer to no one. It is the most dangerous thing they have ever done, and it unleashes a level of violence that shocks even Mexico. August 24, 2010. A convoy of Zeta gunmen stops a group of migrants in the municipality of San Fernando, Tamaulipas, 72 people. Men and women from Honduras, El Salvador, Ecuador, Brazil, and other countries. They have crossed multiple borders, traveled thousands of miles, and are trying to reach the United States, trying to reach a better life. The Zetas stop them. They offer a choice: join the cartel as soldiers, mules, or informants, or pay a ransom. The migrants have no money. Many refuse to join a criminal organization. So the Zetas take them to a ranch outside the village of Elusive, and they execute them. One by one, shot in the back of the head, 58 men, 14 women. 72 people in total piled up in a warehouse like they were nothing. One man survives, an Ecuadorian. He takes a bullet in the neck and face and plays dead. He lies in the pile of corpses for hours. Then, when the killers are gone, he gets up. He walks shot, bleeding in the baking Tamaulipas sun for more than 10 miles through the desert until he reaches a military checkpoint. He tells them what happened. The Mexican military goes to the ranch. What they find shocks the entire world. A captured Zeta later tells investigators the migrants were killed because the Zetas believed they would be recruited by their rival, the Gulf Cartel. 72 human beings. Killed not because of anything they had done, but because of something the Zetas thought they might do. The massacre was reported as the biggest single discovery of its kind in the Mexican drug war, and as the worst-known atrocity committed by a Mexican trafficking organization to date. The UN, Amnesty International, and governments across Latin America demanded justice. Justice did not come quickly, and Los Zetas did not slow down. March 2011, the same municipality of San Fernando. Los Zetas begin stopping passenger buses on Federal Highway 101, a road locals would come to call the Highway of Death. They pull the buses over at fake military checkpoints. They kidnap the passengers, or ordinary Mexican citizens going about their lives. They take them to ranches. What happens next is almost incomprehensible. Male passengers are forced to fight each other to the death. Cage fights between kidnapped civilians. as a test, and as a training exercise for new Zeta recruits. One Zeta member later testifies in a U.S. court that the fights were ordered by the Zeta commander Miguel Trevino Morales to make new killers lose their fear. Women are raped. Those who survive the fights and prove themselves are forced to join the cartel. Everyone else is killed. Between April 6 and June 7, 2011, Mexican authorities excavate the surrounding area and find 193 bodies buried in 47 clandestine mass graves. 193 people, murdered, buried, and forgotten. Some estimates from arrested Zetas suggest more than 600 total bodies may be buried in clandestine graves near San Fernando, though Mexican authorities never confirmed the full number. In a single stretch of highway in northeastern Mexico, Los Zetas had created a killing field that the Mexican government could no longer ignore or contain. The Highway of Death had become Mexico's darkest secret, and now the entire world was looking at it. October 7, 2012. An anonymous tip. Mexican Navy intelligence receives information about the location of a man they have been hunting for a decade, the co-founder of Los Zetas. The man who turned a band of military deserters into a continent-spanning empire of terror, Heriberto Lazcano, El Lazca. Z3. Mexican Marines move into a remote area of Coahuila State close to the Texas border. They find Lazcano. A firefight breaks out. When it is over, Lazcano is dead. He is 37 years old. The Mexican Navy confirms the kill through forensic examination. The first commander of Los Zetas, the man who oversaw the San Fernando massacres, the Casino Real attack, the systematic torture and murder of thousands, is gone. But the story does not end there. In one final act that captures everything about the chaos of Mexico's drug war, the body of Heriberto Lazcano is stolen from the morgue by armed men within hours of his death being confirmed. Gunmen walk into a funeral home in Coahuila and take the corpse. Los Zetas will not allow even their dead leader to be paraded by the government. Even in death they had power, one Mexican journalist reported. Even the body of their leader was untouchable. With Lazcano dead, formal command passes to Z40 Miguel Trevino Morales. The man who was already running the day-to-day operations now has no one above him, no one to restrain him, no one to tell him when enough is enough. July 15, 2013, 3 a.m. Mexican Marines close in on a vehicle traveling near Anahuac, Nuevo Leon, close to the Texas border. Inside, Miguel Angel Trevino Morales, Z40, the man who ordered the San Fernando massacres, the man who burned the Casino Real, the man described as one of the most sadistic criminals in modern history. He is arrested without a single shot fired. The arrest stuns Mexico. Not because Z40 is captured. The government had been hunting him for years, but because of how it happens. The most brutal man in the most brutal cartel in Mexico surrenders without a fight. No last stand, no blaze of glory, just a man in a truck who knows the game is finally over. Power passes to his brother, Omar Trevino Morales, Z42, but Omar is not Z40. He does not have the same commanding presence, the same terrifying reputation. The Zetas under Z42 continue operating, but the golden era, if you can call the era of mass murder and burning casinos golden, is over. 2 years later, in March 2015, Mexican federal forces capture Omar Trevino Morales at one of his homes in San Pedro Garza Garcia, one of the wealthiest municipalities in Mexico. The last Trevino brother in command is in custody. In 2019, a Mexican court sentences him to 18 years in prison. In August 2024, 11 Zeta gunmen convicted for their direct role in the 2010 San Fernando massacre received sentences of up to 50 years in a Mexican court. Justice, 14 years late, finally reaches a fraction of the men who murdered 72 people on that ranch. Rival groups struggling to dislodge the Zetas adopted some of their tactics, one analysis states, and felt the need to arm themselves with the same military-style weaponry in order to compete, further ramping up violence across the country. CJNG, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, which we covered in our last documentary, explicitly modeled itself on the Zeta approach: military weapons, military tactics, confrontational violence against the state itself. The Zetas did not just terrorize Mexico. They taught every cartel that came after them how to be worse. The U.S. government considers the Zeta legacy responsible for deepening the arms race between Mexican cartels and the state, fueling the demand for military-grade weapons that flowed south from the United States, triggering political crises over corruption that paralyzed entire states, and contributing directly to the wave of migration that saw hundreds of thousands of Central Americans and Mexicans flee northward from the violence the Zetas had normalized. Here is what the story of Los Zetas actually is. It is not just a story about drugs. It is a story about what happens when a state fails its own people. When soldiers are paid so little that they can be bought for a cartel salary. When poverty is so deep that crime is the only rational choice. When corruption is so total that an entire criminal army can operate for decades with political protection. It is a story about the consequences of military training without accountability. America spent years and taxpayer money training elite Mexican forces to be perfect weapons, and then watched as those weapons turned around and pointed at civilians. It is a story about 72 people who just wanted to reach a better life and were shot in the back of the head in a warehouse in the desert. About 193 people pulled off buses and murdered in mass graves. About 52 people burned alive in a casino because the owner owed money. About a police chief who accepted the most dangerous job in Mexico and was dead within 6 hours. Los Zetas as an organization is broken. Its leaders are dead or in prison. Its territory is fragmented, but the violence they made normal has never gone away. The fear they planted in entire states of Mexico has never left. The children who grew up watching cartel executions on the streets of Nuevo Laredo and Tamaulipas are adults now. Some of them are the soldiers fighting the cartels. Some of them joined the cartels. And the cycle continues. America trained them, Mexico unleashed them, and thousands of ordinary, innocent people paid the price. That is the story of Los Zetas. Soldiers who were built to stop the cartels, and became the worst cartel Mexico ever faced. A story of betrayal, ambition, and a level of violence that changed an entire country forever. If this documentary hit you the way it hit me when I researched it, please smash that like button. Subscribe to Crime Case Vault, and share this with someone who thinks Mexico is just beaches and tacos. This is the real Mexico, the one the news does not fully explain, the one that matters. And here is the question I want you to answer in the comments below. The U.S. trained these soldiers. Does that make America partially responsible for what Los Zetas became? Drop your answer down there. I will read every single one. New documentary dropping soon. Stay locked in. Stay curious. And remember, the most disturbing stories are always the true ones.